Before we start the session, I request all of you to keep your microphone muted and video off. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. A very good evening to one and all present here. We hope you all are in pink of your health and practicing social distancing well. We wish you all the will, strength, and well being. IEEE MBIT Student Branch presents a webinar on Azure Security of Agnito, a grateful acknowledgement. We warm heartedly welcome you all. We welcome our honorable guest, Mr. Avinash Shah, IEEE Branch Counselor, Professor Sheetal Gondalia Ma'am, respected faculty members, and all the fellow mates. Praying to the Almighty is a must before doing any work. So, for a holy and peaceful beginning of the event, let us all pray to Goddess Saraswati so that she showers all her blessings upon us. Thank you. Technology, Administration and Security from New Jersey Institute of Technology, Newark, USA. He was responsible for securing both on-site and cloud infrastructure across dozens of systems and various network architecture. Previously, Avinash Shah went with Sun Pharma for 5 years as an infrastructure and security engineer. He implemented and managed OS application patch management across all systems in North America. He led the migration and decommissioning of systems in a site after announced closure, ensured minimal downtime and access to critical legacy data in compliance with FDA and organizational standards. He also performed semi-annual infrastructure security audits in adherence to corporate guidelines and implemented a plan of actions to resolve critical security issues. Sir has over 10 years of corporate IT experience. His certificate includes CompTIA Security Plus and Cisco CCNA. IEEE MBIT SB is delighted to have such notable personality as a speaker. I would request Sir to commence the session further.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. As mentioned, my name is Avinash Shah. I am a security engineer for quite some time with various organizations. I am a security engineer for Diversified for about 2 years now, and during that time, we have gone fully within Azure security. So we've migrated the majority of our infrastructure to the cloud. Part of that is assessing what you currently have locally within your local infrastructure, determining whether it's worth it to move to the cloud, and creating a plan, an action plan to move it to the cloud. I have a master's degree also, as well as a few certifications, which I will discuss at the end of the session. So first things first, what is Microsoft Azure? As everyone knows, it's a cloud computing platform, but those are buzzwords, cloud computing, without understanding the complexities of what it is in terms of, are you just storing your networking and infrastructure in the cloud? Or are you just creating your backup in the cloud? There are many complexities within Azure, but simply said, Azure is Microsoft's solutions to the next generation. They are willing to move all of their legacy infrastructure, which is going from Active Directory to system patching to domain management to database management, everything that used to be on-prem for the past 20 to 30 years, Microsoft has put in all of their R&D and research into moving everything to the cloud. So that way, in the event you want to move just your infrastructure, meaning your servers, your VMs, your networking, everything can be moved to the infrastructure, and you can design it as you want. Or you can just say, Microsoft, I want to purely run an application. Do you have this application in your list? They do. great. They will be the provider and the hoster for that application, and you will just run it as a service, or you can just, as I mentioned earlier, do everything yourself within their Microsoft Azure environment. Azure, as I mentioned earlier, was designed from the ground up. It started around 2008 as Microsoft
Hello.
Red. Sorry about that. I was presenting earlier. I turned it off and I turned it back on. It did not take. That's technology for you. Okay, so
Okay.
I will. Okay, so now that everyone can at least see what I'm talking about, everyone good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So Azure was designed from the ground up to quickly deploy, build, and manage your applications within their virtual environment. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with AWS. They've taken a lot from Amazon Web Services and used their current Microsoft infrastructure that they've had for the past 20 to 30 years, and they've designed it in such a manner where the stuff that used to be painful within a local Microsoft environment is just a matter of a few clicks to implement within the Microsoft Azure world. So as I was mentioning, what can Azure be used for? It can be as simple as, hey, I have a web server. Can you manage it for me? And then you would upload your web server services to them, and they would provide you a backend and then provide you a front end for your users to log in, and they would run backups for you. Or you can say, I have a 5,000 server setup within one location. I want to get out of hosting it in one location and moving it to the cloud and transfer my bills from a CapEx to an OpEx. So, which is a capital expenditure, meaning you are paying money for a physical good, versus an operational expenditure, which is a monthly bill. Depending on the company, a lot of companies now are going, I don't want to spend $50,000 on a metal server, which will depreciate over time. I would rather just pay monthly 5,000 a month for a year, because that way I'm paying a flat fee. That's where Microsoft Azure really comes useful, as in they have a lot of different modules, which is just a matter of clicking it and seeing, okay, yes, I could use some AI to determine, make some business decisions in terms of saying, okay, when I do add this particular feature to my website or my services, I'm getting this much more interaction. How can I use that data? Microsoft will be able to say, okay, no problem. Let me give you that data. And then you can then also use that data to analyze it yourself, or you can put it into one of their modules to create charts and graphs and import it to their system. So as I was saying, their complexity can range from infrastructure in the cloud to platform, also a pure as a service. They have pretty much anything that you want, they have it within their modules. And I will admit, it does take a good amount of time to get an understanding, as there's such a complex environment within the Azure. It took me a good 6 months just to have a fundamental understanding of what the capabilities are. Do they have something in place? And they normally do. Or they have something on their roadmap to take advantage of that in the next future. So as I say, they do have different variations. In comparison to their market share, yes, Amazon is the leader. No doubt about that within the infrastructure world. But as more and more organizations are currently moving to the cloud, if you're an organization, which I think majority of them all do, have some type of Microsoft footprint on the ground, they have a seamless transition for you to move your infrastructure from the local to the cloud, which I have been involved with for many of my projects, where they saying, okay, our lease in the building is going to end within 1 year. And normally corporations will say, okay, IT, make everything go to the cloud. And then that's it. And then you're stuck there with your fellow IT team going, okay, we now have 45 racks of servers. Each rack has 25 servers, and they want us to move this to the cloud. Let's do it quickly. Microsoft is probably the most simplest way of moving your existing Microsoft Linux infrastructure and networking infrastructure to the cloud. While Amazon is great in if you're a new company and you're ready to design everything from scratch, doing that for transition to a Microsoft from a Microsoft local to a Amazon cloud is quite cumbersome just because it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges, and you do not have the time to learn the difference in when you're tasked with a project like that. So Microsoft's market share is increasing every year. So hopefully there will be more improvements up from their end. So now for the actual security aspect of it. So Microsoft has been in the game for quite some time. Since the late 90s, I phrase that, late 80s, they have been creating pretty much the standard operating procedure for desktop computing, laptop computing, servers, and slowly over the years, different platforms have risen, but Microsoft still right now is the single most largest creator of data. That means every email that flows through Microsoft is analyzed for threat analytics. For each file that exists on their OneDrive, which is their Dropbox for storing their documents, when a virus is captured there, that file extension, that type of basically when a virus comes, you capture the analytics of that file. Microsoft actually has the ability to store that on the back end, going, okay, we are seeing this virus spread across the board, across all of our clients. They have the ability to capture all of that. So their information landscape is uncomparable. Nobody has the amount of data analytics that they do. Now, over the years, every system that gets patched, every time you run Windows Update on your workstation, whether it's a personal device or a workstation device, that information, not in terms of the actual information that you're doing, the possible information for what system you have, what patches you have, that all gets uploaded to their end. So they're able to determine that X amount of customers are running this version of Windows 10. There is a patch that needs to be determined and pushed out quickly. They're also the ones who understand, okay, there's still a lot of Windows XP stations in the environment, which hopefully they're becoming less and less, but they are the ones pushing that, hey, this is an outdated operating system. We know we have X many million operating system hosts still talking to our Microsoft Update services. We are now going to send communication to them and push them and patch them. So as I say, they have the amount of metadata which no other company currently has. Google does in terms of their mobile operating systems, but that's still not as large or anywhere near as what Microsoft has for the past 20 to 30 years from when they've been actually doing workstation operating systems. So now that we know Microsoft is great, and we can actually discuss, not as a joke, but Microsoft in terms of their security practices. Now, over the years, Microsoft has been hit many times where saying, hey, your security is subpar, and is usually an afterthought, which you can, it can be done. Originally in the early days of computing, security was not at the forefront. It was making it work, because if it doesn't work, what good is it? So now that we've progressed in this port of computing throughout the years, security needs to be built into every aspect. Yes, it's great that your website works, but can I log into your website, view your customer data? Are you securing it according to compliance standards? Are you making sure that I do not have the ability to pound your website and get data that's not supposed to be there? What are you doing besides keeping the website stable to make sure that it is secure and the data is secured? Because now as Microsoft is storing data for customers, they are now responsible for the security of those servers. So as I was saying, they built into security in every step of their platform. So from each module, there's a security feature. All those logs are now captured. Those logs can be tweaked and understood. Either they can take care of it and provide you as a security as a service, or they can pass the logs to you. For someone like me, a security engineer within their infrastructure can determine, hey, such and such threat is evolving. Um, let's look at it. What can we do about it? First, determine, is it some application or a system that's not functioning properly, or is it an actual threat from the outside trying to get in and do malicious acts? So this is a very high level understanding of how the information log flows. So if you, any of your staff or colleagues ever get within security, you'll notice it is not as simple as, Well, I wish it was, but it's usually looking at thousands and thousands of log files which generate as the systems are running, as firewalls are running, as systems are running. So your job now is to determine what is a threat. Yes, I have 50,000 transactions coming from somewhere. Now, is this legitimate traffic? Is this an attacker trying to get into our system with you, or is this some person who just doesn't know their username and password, trying it hundreds and hundreds of times? It's now up to you to determine, and using Azure's abilities to determine these types of threats. So as I was saying, down here, they have the log detection. Now, logs have been around for as long as systems have been around. But when you have 50,000, well, phrase that, 50 systems, each generating its own logs, it becomes noise. Now, how do you determine actual threat activity from noise? Either you can sit there and creating Linux scripts or PowerShell scripts or different ways to determine log analytics, but that was an antiquated way of doing things. Now, over time, Azure has the ability to say, okay, you have everything within Azure, great. We can forward all those logs to a log collection system, which will allow you to sort through everything through a GUI-based system and create rules. So that way you can, something as simple as, hey, if I get 10 hits from one IP within 1 minute for bad username and password, this is not possible. A human cannot possibly try the same password username combination within 1 minute. So at that point, you can determine that, yes, this is someone trying to use a username. Someone else is trying to use someone else's credentials. So at that point, you can create an incident response of saying, oh, sorry, something as simple as locking that user's account or notifying that user that, hey, we believe your username and password is being to be compromised. I would advise you please change your username and password to make sure that they do not brute force in. Or you can create something as adding an additional security mechanism of saying, hey, we are now going to need you to contact us to make sure it is you before we release the account back to you. Now, this is just in terms of an account. The same concept can be done for a firewall or making sure that an admin account is not compromised also. So as I was mentioning, that they're building security from the ground up, which basically means from you as a end user using your Office account to log in to check your schoolwork, all the way to an enterprise making sure that an employee does not have access to something they're not supposed to, or a application. So now, if you guys have noticed over the years, a lot of applications also exist in the cloud. LinkedIn, Dropbox, Google, they're all different cloud applications. What over the times now, people are saying, let our cloud application talk directly to your cloud application, which is convenient, but that basically means that if your friend gets compromised, now you get compromised. It's relatively similar to when you install an app on your phone. The app will request, hey, this app needs access to your microphone, needs access to your contact list. Do you allow this? Now, we as end users go, okay, well, I need this app for XYZ purpose. I'm going to allow that app. And we assume that Google Android's protection system, as well as Apple's iOS store, has already vetted this app to make sure that there's nothing malicious in this app. They're not going to look at all my contacts and sell and then capture that and send it to some server in which my friends and contacts now get spam or phishing or whatever. Now that the concept is relatively the same within a cloud app, but you have thousands of cloud apps. Not each one is vetted by Microsoft, or it cannot be vetted because there are thousands of different apps, thousands of different applications that are trying to say, hey, we're going to allow this app to look at your address book so that way it's better for your user to schedule appointments. Now that sounds fine, but unless you actually look at the app and determine, okay, they need this access, why, and in that case, you should verify that. Why do they need read and write access? Why should they ever be able to make an entry in my calendar? Then that's when you notice that, hey, this app is requesting more access than it should, and that is when you should be able to blacklist that app, which is denying it, which makes them, the app owner, update their system, or the app owner is fraudulent, and luckily you've caught it in time and made sure that it does not get within your cloud infrastructure. This is basically something Microsoft calls cloud app security, which personally they are slowly getting better at. Actually, the past few weeks of mine, I've been actually doing this as more and more of our end users want to connect to cloud app security. We need now to vet each app to make sure that, hey, just because I want it doesn't mean that it's secure. And the security team normally has to make that decision saying, sorry, yes, sorry, we cannot use it, or yes, we vetted it, please use it to help the business. So as we now understand exact threat landscape, this is another high level understanding of all the different variations of Azure security. So I can personally say it is very takes a long time and a lot of expertise to understand the full scope. And hopefully within, if you any of you ever get within security, your team can really understand all the complexities within this Azure. For that, AWS also has a very similar security team in terms of their features and stuff, but Microsoft, luckily, they have an understanding of exactly what legacy applications and what legacy systems have been uploaded within theirs. So that way, if you have been using Microsoft products in the past, you can continue to do so in the same fashion, but you can use their advanced security features to have an understanding of what is going on within your environment. So as I say, they do everything from monitoring to networking. Also, what thing is now getting very complex now, if any of you ever work within European divisions or other countries that regulate the type of data, compliance and governance is also a huge concept. So within the United States, there is a compliance standard called PCI, meaning if your company handles credit card information, you must prove that you're handling that credit card information with accordance to PCI guidelines. Easier said than done. You must make sure that nobody can just browse that database. Even a security person cannot be able to go to that database and look at the security cards, credit card numbers in plain text. Now, how do you do that if your application is not secure? That is when the Azure has built-in security policies to make sure that, hey, this application is not compliant, and it'll give you best practices and how you can reach out to your developers and make sure that, hey, you need to make sure this application is compliant, so that way your company can continue to do credit card processing. And every year, the PCI Compliance Board will come to your organization and say, please provide us a document that says that you are compliant. If you're using within Azure systems, it's just a matter of exporting that certificate, emailing it to them, and being good and moving on. Also, their main thing is in terms of their virus protection. As I was mentioning earlier, every computer, every Windows 10 computer, whether you buy another antivirus, comes with Windows Defender. Now, Windows Defender is Microsoft's free, quote unquote, free antivirus that they give out to everyone using their Windows 10 platform. All of those analytics are captured by Microsoft as a kind of, hey, you can use the computer and use the antivirus, but any viruses that you get, we are going to learn about it and use it to improve our systems. Now, majority of the workstations in the world are Windows, and not everyone has their own third-party antivirus. So Microsoft has the ability to absorb all of those threat information and use that to develop better antivirus solutions, create faster responding of, hey, this was just detected somewhere. Let's create a plan of action to remediate, which is known as virus definitions. They also do database security, network security. It's a whole other landscape in terms of security aspects. So first thing we want to touch is the networking security. Now, for years, for legacy infrastructure was, okay, you have a data center in your location. Now you have to buy Cisco firewalls to protect it. Now you're going to have to create a we'll phrase that, any type of firewall to make sure what outside traffic can come in and what inside traffic can go out. You're going to have to then create application firewalls to make sure that your applications, a database, only needs to talk at the database. I do not need to talk to the database server over any other port, any other client. That was all done through different engineers, different platforms. For example, if your company was using Cisco, but then automatically bought a Palo Alto firewall, all that needed to be configured by hand or by an engineer, have an understanding of all the different aspects and to secure the network. Over the years, Microsoft Azure has now moved everything to a single platform. So, one second. So over the years, they have designed it to look very, this is actually a production grade network in which you have several branch offices talking to Azure infrastructure, where there are web servers, domain servers, log servers, and each one of these servers are in their own respective network group. Each one of these network groups talk to other network groups. And if you look under the network group security, they have different rules to define what can talk to what cannot talk to what, to make sure that in the event someone is able to compromise a system, they can only talk via the ports that are secure. For example, I'm not sure if you're familiar how deeply you guys are ingrained with different port levels. Port 80 is known as commonly as a web port. 443 is an encrypted HTTPS, meaning you must transfer, you cannot use an outdated, you must have a valid certificate to use it. And then database, depending on which one, Microsoft is 1443. So each one of these can be done via the GUI interface within the Azure network. Before this, doing it on a local infrastructure was quite painful. I have had to do it before. So before, right, if you notice, each one of these servers are grouped together under a separate group. In the local infrastructure, you unfortunately never get this way of looking at it. You will normally get one large network where all your servers exist, and now you have to create firewall rules for each one of these servers using its IP address, and gets quite complex very quickly to determine what port needs to be open for each system. And hopefully the system owner knows which port, because as a security engineer, it would be great to shut off all the ports and call it a day, but that would not make the application work. So your application owner will tell you, hey, my application needs to be open on the database port, the web service, the log port, whatever the application needs to be done. So over the years, Azure Security has definitely made this very streamlined and able to say, hey, I have 50 web servers, put them all together on one network, and then only allow the web service to be open to the public and other databases. It literally would take 10 minutes to generate that type of rule. As I was mentioning, they have different types of rules and groups. Security groups is what I was mentioning earlier. If you have 5 or 6 of the same type of server, you would definitely put them under a network security group, meaning the same access layer lists, which are firewall rules, can be applied to everything inside that host. So as I was saying, if you have 10 database servers, great. Put them all together in one network group and apply the same rule to them. Done. You don't have to manage it anymore. Another way of application services group is basically where you get, unfortunately, a one rule for all will not work, meaning you then have to go to each application and manage it, which is very similar to what was done before. But for R&D purposes, if you're developing a new application in-house, you don't necessarily know what ports need to be open and not open, so you cannot use a network security group. So the application security groups are very great. In my current organization, we have a subnet of developmental apps in which they are not fully open, but open enough so that the developers can go in and go out and manage it as needed. And we can see at the log level what ports they are using, so that way we can come to them saying, okay, your application you say is done. it is working on these ports and using this type of traffic, we are now going to create a network security group. So hopefully your application continues to run, which is always a fun battle between the networking team and the application owner team. So, so that is another, that was, as I mentioned, that was network security. So I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with DDoS attacks. Now, over the years, as everything is quote unquote moving to the cloud, it has become very complicated now to prevent DDoS attacks, which actually cannot be prevented. But how do you mitigate? Now, as everyone knows, there are botnets, which are basically compromised computers throughout the world. Now, over the basically just high level understanding, DNS service is asking millions of computers to send packets to one particular host or cluster of hosts. Now, normally computers can handle that, but if you have millions upon millions of requests going to one particular host, it's not, there's no way to mitigate that. Either you have two options. Either you shut the servers down and hope that the attack ceases over some time, or even if you don't do that, your servers will start to be flooded with requests, start to crawl, which is basically meaning 100% CPU usage, 100% disk space usage, and eventually they'll shut down on their own, or they will fail because they're just unable to keep up with the load. So that's been around for quite some time. Every large player within the computing world has been hit with these types of attacks. Azure has taken a very interesting way of building in DDoS protection before the application sees it. Now, normally, if you're noticing a flood of activity throughout the world using a legacy infrastructure, and if you're a global organization, how can you make that call of saying, hey, stop all the traffic from China when you have Chinese customers or Chinese employees? It's not possible to do that. But within Azure, you are able to, how can I say it? It learns over time where all your traffic has been coming from over time. It has the ability to determine what is an attacker and what is a customer before it even touches your Azure infrastructure, which before it touches your servers. So for example, normally your servers will, if you ping a server, your server will understand, hey, this is an ICMP MB packet. I'm just going to send a yes if it's allowed, letting that ping request know that, yes, I am here. Under typical infrastructure, that is fine. It'll work because a ping request is just requesting, are you there? Now, within Azure, that ping request will, before it gets to the server, it'll hit its built-in DDoS protection to make sure that, okay, this is legitimate, using AI on the back end, because this is this is not possible for a human to do. It can understand that, hey, okay, this is a legitimate request, and I get ping requests. I get 10,000 ping requests a month. Okay, for the past few months, it goes up and down, maybe by a few hundred. Now, all of a sudden, I'm getting millions of ping requests from a whole bunch of IPs that I've never talked to before. So now Azure will build it using the DDoS protection, be able to filter each one of these requests to make sure that, hey, have I seen you before? Okay, come on in. No, I've never seen you before. I'm going to block you until this threat slowly goes back down. So that way, at least the legitimate traffic is still functioning, but brand new traffic will be stopped. Now, that's a plus and minus, but it is definitely hands better than shutting everything down. So at least some business will remain for people who have used it within the past few months, depending on the logging settings that you have created. So this has actually been a great, how can I say this, great feature over the past few years. A lot of gaming companies have moved their stuff into the cloud just for this particular reason, because gaming servers are, especially for the past few months since everyone is home, have been very vulnerable to these because their applications are all time sensitive, while Now that they are able to determine that, hey, all of my customers have been using these IPs, I can let the games progress, because within gaming, if their servers start to fail, definitely everyone will notice the lag. Everyone will notice that their games are suffering performance wise. But luckily, with DDoS protection built in, it definitely does mitigate these types of threats. Okay, so now for the actual logs. Now, very similar to what I was mentioning before, security is all based on logs. You will never know attacker is attacking your company unless you start to look at the logs, which is very cumbersome at first, but within Azure, you're able to see each one of these logs within a very different base system. So I can, for example, here we have three successful logins for three people, but we're noticing that they're they're within a few minutes of each other. So this is one second. Sorry about that. So this is basically a portal that I've seen way too many times while I've been working in the Azure infrastructure, where you're able to determine this is a user, Tim Kennedy. He's logging into the Azure portal. He's successful and he's logging in from this location, and he's logging, and then geographically this location is from, looks like Redmond, Washington, which is Microsoft's headquarters in North America. And each one of these logs are captured and stored by default within 90 days. So you are able to maintain, but this is built into Azure. You don't need to do anything else. It's all captured for you. So each one of your users, you have the understanding of the location, the device they came in, which will be, a web. In this case, we can tell it's a web browser. The web browser information would say, hey, they're running Firefox or Chrome. Is using this particular version, and it'll also tell you if they're running Windows 10, Windows 7, MacBook, Linux, what have you. It'll also tell you all the details of their authentication, meaning how many seconds did it take for them to authenticate after they put their username in. Now, normally it'll take a few seconds to put a password in, or it'll automatically cache it. There are different ways of analyzing this to verify if it's a security threat or not. We've had incidents where users are using, we on our corporate workstations block the use of autofill, which is what Chrome and Firefox and Internet Explorer ask you, hey, would you like us to save this password for you when you enter the website? We have policies in place to prevent that. So it forces people to use a password manager instead of having it stored in the web browser. Because as web browsers are fine for well, they shouldn't be it. You should always be typing in the password, so that way you do not rely on the system to remember it for you. Because heaven forbid you walk away from your computer, someone looks at it, hey, I can now log into the websites because they saved the passwords in Chrome. So we, as a corporation, have blocked that using conditional access, as well as making sure all of our workstations have that blocked. I'll speak to more conditional access later. But so yes, this is a high level. This is actually an example of a log file that Azure security people have to look at to verify, hey, this person is logging in successfully. A lot of times you will see that, hey, this person logged in from US and then China. Let's use them as a good example, within 1 hour. 100% you automatically know, we all know it is impossible for someone to travel within that time, which triggers an alert. That alert will say something called impossible travel. And then from there, we will then look at the logs or then automatically block that user from accessing it. So either we know two things. This user's username and password were compromised, meaning he used the same password or something somewhere else, or his username and password were captured from a phishing scam, or, which actually is, he has installed some type of VPN on his computer, and he has not been informed that that is blocked from our end, and he's installed it somehow, and he has logged in from a VPN IP address, which will flag this alert. At that point, we will connect to his workstation, remove the VPN software, and tell him that you are not authorized to install this software, and then we will block that VPN provider or VPN service. Now, unfortunately, as you guys, if someone of your team gets in within security, you'll notice that for VPN providers, there are hundreds of them. It is technically impossible to block one all at a time. You have to block them as your organization sees them. So it is very intuitive to look at these logs and have an understanding of where these users are going, because within any organization, the users are the biggest security flaw. No matter, and I fought this battle for almost 15 years. Even before I was in corporate IT, I was an intern. Users are the biggest security threat, from writing their passwords down on post-its to texting it to each other to sharing it with each other via email. Unfortunately, that is your largest security, but at least you can put in rules and then watch their activity to make sure that in the event they do something wrong, you can catch them, educate them, so hopefully that they don't do it again in the future. So I'm not familiar how many people you are of Active Directory. Active Directory has been around for, I think, 25 years. That is the identity management for Microsoft for as long as they've been around for NT. That is basically each one of your users has an individual account that is stored in Active Directory. Now, Azure has their own Active Directory, which you can either create and copy paste everything within their infrastructure, or you can do a hybrid saying, I want you to sync between my local Active Directory and my cloud Active Directory. So users can have to use the same username and password, either their local or in the cloud, anything application in the cloud, which makes it a lot easier for the end user to only have to remember one password instead of different passwords across the board. So because everything is Active Directory integrated, you're able to see each one of these transactions or via the log. So if a user is trying to access an application that they do not have access to, once or twice, obviously they'll go, okay, I know I put my password in correctly, I must not have access to it. So then they'll put a request in the help desk, and then the help desk will go from there, determining why they need it, and then get manager's approval to do it. But also from that same request, if someone tries accessing something they're not supposed to hundreds of times in a matter of minutes, either this person is very persistent on trying to do it, or this is some type of threat actor who has access to that person's account, now trying to see what that person now has access to and what they don't, so that way they can either try to collect information, penetrate systems, what have you. We actually see that all the time. We call that elevated access request, in which all of a sudden now they're trying to log into the admin portal. They're now trying to log into, this person is a customer service representative, yet they're trying to log into the finance system. Why is that all of a sudden? They know they're not in finance. We will see that on our end using under the threat intelligence. So Microsoft usually has all this built in. So they'll be able to tell you that, hey, we can tell you when XYZ happens. We can alert you to it, and then you can take from those alerts and do what you must. So this and the next example right here is a very high level. Actually, this is actually a realistic demonstration of all the different alerts that you can create within Azure, that to alert to the IT team, and then the IT team can look at them and determine. Well, one, as I mentioned earlier, the second one, the list is, sorry, let's go back there. The second one, this is called risky IP address. So we get my current corporate company is global, but we do not have any businesses in Africa, Europe. We only have it within Asia and South America, North America. So by default, there should be no activity from Africa or Europe. So in our case, we can block it, the entire country's IP, by any block. So if you look at the second alert, it says alert you to when a user logs in from a risky IP. We just basically put in all the IP addresses for a particular country. If we see a successful login from that country, it'll trigger that alert. So the fourth alert, also multiple failed logins to an app. Now we can determine how many failed logins is a user just putting in their username and password wrong, or okay, this is an automated script that somebody has put in to try to brute force their attack, which is brute force is just a system put into place to try different variations of passwords to try to log into a system. Now, most systems nowadays, after 5 or 6 unsuccessful logins, will block your account from logging in after a period of time and force you either to reset the password or wait 1 hour. So this is an exact alert on which will get triggered. The first one actually is ransomware, which if you're in the security field, that is the thing that keeps you up at night, because no matter how secure you want to make your system, there are always legacy systems within the corporation that are always very old. There is always a plan to move them out or move them to a more modern system. Now, these are systems that your company, when I was in Sun Pharma, we had many of these applications in-house. Now, these are because the company's been around since the 80s. Over the years, they've had to create applications in-house to do their business needs. Now, if within the IT world, you'll notice that if it works, leave it alone. Unfortunately, that line has been used for so many years where people don't understand that just because it works doesn't mean that it should work in 2010, 2015, 2020. So these are legacy applications that must exist on legacy hardware or legacy operating systems such as 2008 R2. Microsoft, this is a version of Microsoft Server that Microsoft has said since 2015, hey, we are no longer supporting this. Please stop using it because it's filled with security threats that we are no longer going to manage because it's been 7 or 8 years since this product has been out, and it's time for you to move to a more modern operating system. If you ever look at that, the amount of servers within the world that still use 2008, that is what keeps security engineers awake, because every time you put a request into the application owners, hey, can we start creating a plan to move this to a more security? Oh, well, we're working on a plan, and we ask for an update. What is that plan? Oh, we're still working on the plan. And okay, so ransomware is basically a vulnerability in which an attacker gets access to your system, encrypts all your files, and says, hey, if you want the encryption key, pay up. Now, that ransom can be anywhere from a few $1,000s to, depending on the size of the organization, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And there is no guarantee that they're still not in your network ready to, okay, they got their money. As soon as you start decrypting their files, boom, they start encrypting you again and now ask for more money. So you're at that point, you're stuck in a very dangerous situation, which actually, if you read in the news, Honda, global auto manufacturer, has actually been hit with ransomware, and they are quite actively dealing with it right now because they are such a large organization. They have many systems, and depending on how proactive they've been, they're going to be in some serious hot water for the next few months as they recover from this attack. So yes, these are back to the PowerPoint. We have many different types of alerts built in with the Azure, and your security team will normally create rules, tweak them, understand that, okay, this is legitimate traffic. This something that figures as ransomware is not technically ransomware. It is a application just working the way it does. It looks like ransomware because it creates lots of temporary files that are encrypted. It looks like it, but it's not. At that point, you create a whitelist and whitelist that application within the ransomware thing, so that way you have less alerts. Because within the IT security field, you will get thousands of alerts. You will wake up the next morning, look at your inbox and go, why did I pick this job? And then you will slowly chug through those alerts. Your job is to not just work through the alerts, understand what alert is important, what's not important, and slowly figure out, okay, next morning I should have less alerts because I'm going to create rules to say, okay, yeah, this is normal, this is not normal. The normal stuff, let me make sure that the normal stuff is kept as normal, and then you would slowly work your way to get less alerts. So one thing that Microsoft also, now in turn back to end users. So for so many years, username and password, that is all anyone ever needed to know to get into any system. And Microsoft Azure at least has something built in called multi-factor authentication, which I'm sure over the years you guys have. Google has it within Gmail, most platforms now, to make sure that the standard password was something I know. Now that was great because I can tell my mom my password and now she can log in. That's not very secure nowadays when everything is username and password. So now MFA is basically requiring that person, after they put the username and password, to prove that they are who they are. This can be done using a text message code, an email to their email with a code, a phone call, or using an app to verify that they are the actual person that they claim to be before they get access to the system that they're trying to get access to. Within my organization, my first action within my current job was to enable multi-factor authentication across the 2,000 users. This was a huge undertaking, only because at that point you now have to train 2,000 people who may the entire spectrum of technical understanding. It's like basically trying to explain to your grandma, hey, I know you've been doing this for this long, but I need you to learn something new. It's it's quite a task, but once you do get past that point, you are now much better off in terms of securing your infrastructure, or your, in this case, the Azure. Because even if someone's password gets out into the open, their cell phone is a whole very complicated thing in order to get access to steal their text message codes and stuff like that. That is usually done at a very targeted level, not by someone who found their password in some dark website, and can, or through a password dump, and now can try to log in as them. So MFA, I think, will soon be the required across all systems to make sure that the identity of the person is legit before they get access to it. I think most banking systems now require it to make sure you can't just log in with the username and password to get into the banking system. I think most email platforms are now doing that too. So conditional access is a step above um, getting access to the system. So example, okay, so even if you do, let's say for a secure system, you get access to someone's username and password. Okay, you somehow manage to steal their cell phone from while they're at the coffee shop or something like that. But now the system will say, okay, you are logging in with the correct credentials, but where are you logging in from? Where is the signal coming from? So now I can see, okay, you are logging in from a workstation that is not that is not cloud enabled. So for all of our in my current organization, all of our workstations are joined to Azure, meaning that as soon as they hit the internet, we know where they are, and so that we can so that we can manage them and to make sure that they do get access to the system. This also includes their mobile phones. Now, they have to download a company app on their mobile phone to prove that who they are, so that way they can use their phone to access email or do whatever they want to do on their phone, but within our company portal, which they requires them to prove who they are before they even open the app. So even let's flip back to the original example. If someone gets access to someone's information and steals their cell phone, if we see that they are logging in from a device that's not registered, at that point we can make a decision of saying, sorry, blocked access, and then from there we can enforce that by triggering a notification for us to contact the user saying, hey, you're logging in from somewhere else, what's going on? And then they'll say, hey, yes, my phone was stolen from somewhere. And at that point, then we can lock their account until they are able to communicate with the IT team. So these things are now working in tandem. Before, when someone's account was compromised, they would just log in from anywhere, log in, capture information, and use them for whatever purpose. There's 50 different thousand things what you can do when you have someone's access to a company's email system. So now within Azure, all these things have been built in to protect the actual before the information even gets exposed to the end user. So Yeah, this actually has been a great understanding for us to make sure that somebody, let's say before you go home and you log into your corporate email account, your computer, you don't understand, your computer has already been compromised. You downloaded some program to download some music that came with a nice Trojan. That Trojan is now hidden in your computer, capturing all the information that you're doing and sending it somewhere else. You don't know what's going on. But now you logged into a work email. That information now gets sent to the Trojan. Whomever is running that Trojan now knows that, hey, such and such is there. They can then remote to your machine and look at your activity and see, okay, this is what's going on. And then also, hey, I saved that username and password to my work on my home computer. So now that Trojan now technically has the ability to infiltrate your computer, log into your corporate email, and download your emails and your address book. That is the largest thing that we're seeing now. So now this attacker knows everyone within your company, what their title is, and also if you're in finance, they can learn, okay, for this PO to get processed and a financial transaction to be sent, I need to impersonate these and these people. We see these types of frauds all the time. Now, remember, within security, having an attacker hack you is rare. Having an attacker gain access to you and spoofing you and creating fraudulent purchase orders through email, that is very easy to do. And depending on the technical complexity of the person who is running those financial transactions, they don't know. They don't know that, hey, this email address is one letter different. I'm going to now send money into them. And unfortunately, once you send money via wire transfer, it is very difficult to get it back. So all these things are now securing us from the ground up using Microsoft Azure. And a lot of organizations now are doing this so that way they can make sure that the weakest link is the most secure link, to make sure that the end user needs to go through all these checks and balances to make sure that they get access to the system. And that system can just be something as simple as email. So to basically to summarize all the security features and services within Microsoft Azure, it protects you from the server level, from the firewall level, using complex from the also at the endpoint. So it's basically from top to bottom. If you are able to utilize all of these features, you could definitely secure your Azure infrastructure very a lot better than you could have in a few years ago. And because all of this stuff is within Azure, you don't have to go out and buy sophisticated equipment. Because previous in my organization, we wanted multi-factor authentication. Fine. But we were using IBM Lotus Notes, which did not have any of this stuff. So now you have to go out and spend thousands of dollars from some vendor, find a way to implement it, then from there, try to find a way of finding an engineer who already knows how to do this, or learn it yourself. Within Azure, it's just a matter of looking at their training documentation, checking it off, teaching your users, okay, this is how multi-factor works, and letting the built-in service work so that way you can secure your users. So just so everyone knows, you can get started with Microsoft Azure for free. This is I don't work for them in any way. I've just been using them for a few years. So the best way to learn is by trying. So if you went to Microsoft Azure, you can create a free account. They give you $200 of credit, so that way you can create your own servers. You can create your own firewall rules. You can create your own pretty much anything within the trial account. Obviously, I do not recommend you creating an e-commerce website, because in order for you to activate the financial parts, you will need to tie a credit card in and a bunch of other stuff. But in terms of, let's say I want to create my first web server on a cloud infrastructure and I want to secure it, you can do it in a matter of minutes using Azure, creating a Linux or Windows web server, creating a firewall rule that says, okay, this is my IP addresses for my home computer, I can access it. So that's the best way of learning. When I was in my master's course, we did this with Amazon. It was a very simple way of logging in with your student account. They say, oh, you're a student, let me give you $50 worth of credit so you can create servers and use it. Um, so yes, I would definitely recommend if you're interested in learning Azure, not even from a security aspect, if you're even going to go into developmental operations or anything cloud related, and you want to do a little bit differently, Azure has it built in. So as for the certification paths within Azure, Microsoft has very different ways of doing it. You can take the 9100 or 900, which is basically the Azure fundamentals, which is basically saying what is Azure, what it can do, pretty much all the stuff I've been talking about for quite some time. But they have, and I barely scratched the surface. For just for the records, I focus mostly on the security aspect. But if you're a developer and you're familiar with .NET or you want to do, they have everything built into their studios to allow for developmental operations to work within the Azure infrastructure. So that way you can create applications directly within Azure instead of having to do it within a tenant. So currently myself, I have already taken the AZ 500. I'm working on the next step of the Azure security certifications. And in the future, if you guys work for a corporation or a company and they're willing to pay for your education, definitely take advantage of, even if you're going to AWS route or any cloud security, or any cloud platform, definitely take the security exams. It'll definitely separate you from the rest of your organization, because it'll show that, hey, this person is taking advantage of our offerings. And as I said, if your company is willing to pay for it, there's nothing to lose. Just put your time and effort in to learn the platforms using the free trial, and you'll understand exactly how to do certain activities. So that way, when your company does want you to do something, you can put your hand up proudly and say, hey, I already know how to do this. I practice with it. Or if you're going to join another organization during your interview process, you can say that I've accomplished these and these certificates and I have hands-on experience, which is 10 times better than theoretical experience. So that is all I pretty much have, and I think we've hit our time. So if there's any questions, please share them. Give them to your proctor. The proctor will, or type them in the chat. I will share this PowerPoint um, with the organizers of the event, as well as my LinkedIn and email address if you have any questions regarding Azure security or Linux security or pretty much any type of security. I have a very I play around a lot, and I'm one of those few people that will actually enjoy solving technical questions for fun. So, any questions, anyone? Is Azure? Yes, actually, if you are I don't know about profitable, but in terms of minimizing on expenses, yes, because if you look at the cost model for Azure, you can get going very quickly. So right now, let's say you are a small business, 50 employees. You need email, the whole Microsoft 365 package. So to get going with Azure, you can be as low as $10 per month per user. So for 50 employees, you're looking at about 5,000 a month for the full package, but that includes everything. I'm sorry, rephrase that, $500 a month. That includes the entire Microsoft 365 package, as well as unlimited email quotas, built-in fire. It's very cost-effective for small enterprises. I run a freelance IT business. I do some of my servers in AWS and in Azure for my customers. It is very simple to pay a flat monthly fee and not have to worry about, okay, where am I going to buy the server for them, put it in their building. And some of these places don't have a location to put a server, because then from with the server you need redundant power, then you need redundant cooling, then you need redundant internet. When you're running it within a cloud infrastructure for a small enterprise, it's very straightforward. As long as they have internet, they're good. And if they're going to pay a monthly bill of $500 a month, it's much easier for them to pay that per month than to tell them that, okay, to get started, I need you to give me $5,000 to buy a server, then pay for the licensing, then pay for the cooling, then pay for this. So the initial startup is huge because you can easily be looking at $5,000 to $10,000 to set up a small business office if you're going to be purchasing the hardware and getting everything going. When if you're going to be using Azure, it's just a matter of finding an IT technician who understands Azure, creating this infrastructure for you within their portal, creating your users, and giving them access to the users, and then paying the monthly bill. Internet of Things, how can I explain that real quick? I will email you on that, Sharma, because it's basically, I used to work at a manufacturing plant where each one of the devices, and I used to work in a pharmaceutical company, so each one of the machines that would manufacture the products, we had an initiative to connect to Internet of Things, which would capture all the analytical data. All that analytical data would be stored within Azure. So you can then utilize Azure to say, hey, listen, we have 50 machines. We have this is the output of each machine. Each machine is processing this pill. So that way, instead of having to have a in-house solution to show your managers that, hey, this is the current production unit, blah blah blah, managers want to see, or rephrase, a higher up want to see performance charts, productivity charts. Within Azure, you can incorporate all of that, so that way you have all the data in one place. You can then export that data and then present it to them. That's how I've used Internet of Things before. There are different modules within Azure. I'll send you the information for you. So for the career scopes as a network engineer, that can be done, but in this case, if you really want to become a network engineer within US, AWS and the Azure networking, if I go back a few PowerPoints, does this PowerPoint have it for, okay, there it is. The bottom chart is where you'd want to go, which is the architecture. There's actually a network. If you Google Azure networking experience or security trainings, you'll see that they have customized exams for security and networking. So networking engineering, if you're going to go within Azure, is very different than if you're going to go in terms of Cisco or Aruba or any of the existing companies, because the way you have to do it before is very different than if you're going to go within Azure. But if you're going to go within a cloud computing networking engineering, definitely take those exams, because they're difficult because they are new in terms of, you don't understand the underlying, nobody knows the underlying networking infrastructure that is within the Azure data centers. So if you're going to become a network engineer, yes, do your Cisco, CCNA, and all that, so you have an understanding of the technology of how it works. How do firewalls work? How do well, in this case, next gen firewalls, which are called level 7, layer 7. I can't talk today. Layer 7 firewalls work, but then you'll notice when you see an Azure networking infrastructure, looks nothing like the Cisco. You'll have to understand their terminology, their firewall rules, their VPN rules. But since you're already familiar with the Cisco stuff, you'll understand it's just learning the differences, not learning everything from scratch in terms of how do I create a VPN link from my location to my Azure tenant. So yeah, their prospects are very good in terms of network engineers, especially on the cloud end. Less on the local infrastructure, because a lot of companies are taking advantage of moving their stuff to the cloud, only because, but that's not going to say, there's a whole bunch of benefits of doing it. For certain industries can't do it only because they are so vested in their local infrastructure. The amount of money they would have to spend to the cloud, they would defeat the whole purpose of cost savings. So definitely, I would say networking engineering can be done. Most prominent career. It depends on the organization. Now, personally, I was an AWS person because my previous organization used AWS. now all of a sudden my company said we're going to go with Azure. So okay, take all the AWS knowledge, put it in the back of my mind. Now I'm going to learn Azure. So it depends on where your passion is. Learning a platform is great. You should learn both in terms of AWS and Microsoft. AWS is a little more different because it's not vendor neutral. So within Microsoft, you're going to be following the Microsoft way. They have their own terminology. They have their own stuff. AWS, though, I don't know if I can show you my. I don't think I can show you my production link. But when you log into their platform, it's very different. But there's no terminology for Microsoft only. It'll work for everything. If you have Linux systems, Windows systems, Unix systems, it'll treat them all the same. When in Microsoft, you'll notice small differences of doing it. But personally, I would say if you're going to be looking for a career, look at the organization that you want to join. See what they want to do, which we're not want to do, where they are going. If they're going AWS, that's where you want to learn and grow. Both of them have their own plus and minuses, I would definitely say. AWS, you can learn right off the back. Azure, you can learn right off the back. But having a fundamental understanding of what cloud computing is, that is, I think, a bigger understanding of learning. Because let's say right now, Google also has their own cloud computing platform. And in a matter of time, maybe in a few years, Google will become the largest market share and Amazon slowly dips down. Because remember, every company, nobody's number one forever. Over time, Amazon will slowly down. Microsoft, of like 10, 15 years ago, was the biggest company in the world. Now other competitors have come. It's just a matter of time for Amazon to do the same. Um, Oh yes, other clouds. Azure has, I can tell you, so many consoles. It's mind-boggling. I can tell you right now. So yeah, Azure has plenty of different portals. If you go to if you create your free account and just go to Azure portal, portal.azure.com, you'll be overwhelmed with the amount of different portals that they have to do whatever. If you have a let's say you have an e-commerce site and you want to integrate with the SQL backend, you can create a GUI-based SQL server. It's quite cumbersome in terms of, but they do have it. So yes, I will definitely email you, Sharma, so you have my email, and I'll give my contact information also to the proctors for this, as well as the organizers of this event.
Thank you very much, sir. It was really an informative and interesting session. I request everybody to kindly fill the attendance sheet which is provided in the chat box. I would like to thank each and everyone who gathered us with us today for this session. Thank you. Now, I request everyone to join us for the MBIT anthem followed by the national anthem.
कर्तव्यों का बोध कराती अधिकारों का ज्ञान शिक्षा से ही मिल सकता है सर्वोपरि सम्मान